Hello and welcome to another episode of the Best You interview series. It's Gary here again. Thank you very much for taking the time to join me today. And today I'm delighted to be joined by my pal, journalist Chris Jack, who is here to talk about his career and all things journalism. Chris joined the Herald and Times Sports Desk, and that's in the west of Scotland for folks who are tuning in internationally, back in 2008 after graduating from the University of the West of Scotland with a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism. And he became the Rangers writer in 2015 and wrote the story of our title win going for 55 back in 2021, of course, before covering our fantastic run to the Europa League final in 2022. Chris also moved to the Rangers Review in 2023, and we'll get into a lot of the who's, what's, and whys as we go through this conversation. Chris, my friend, thank you very much for taking the time to chat with me today.
No problem at all. Thanks for having us on.
I'm more than happy, more than delighted. So can you tell me a wee bit about your journey into sports journalism and specifically why journalism and what drew you to specialise ultimately in football?
The thing that drew me to football was, as we've just discussed before we came on air, a love of Rangers. Always been a big fan of the club, supported them throughout my childhood, former season ticket holder. And when it comes to that time in high school, when you're asked to pick subjects, you're asked to pick careers, you're asked to look at university choices, wasn't really sure what I fancy doing. Obviously, something sport related was always a target. And it was actually my English teacher in fourth year who said, "Why don't you pursue being a writer or write books or go into newspapers?" So I had a look at it and decided this is something that I think I could do. I could go and make a career out of. And actually left school a year earlier than a lot of my friends, a lot of my peers. They stayed on for 6 years, basically just to bum about, if you like, and have that extra year. I decided at 17, I'm going to get myself into university. I want to start this career as early as possible. By that time, I had already been working on an ad hoc basis for a local newspaper, doing shifts. So did a couple of court reporting shifts, did a couple of subbing shifts on their desk, did a bit of football stuff for them. Colin McRae, the famous Scottish rally driver, was still competing in the World Rally Championship at that time. So I filed reports for the local paper on him as well, and really just started to build up a bank of contacts and a bank of newspaper cuttings and clippings that then gave me something. So when it came to the interviews for university, they can say, "Well, how interested are you in this?" I can say, "Well, actually, I've been doing this. This is something that I think I can actually make a career out of." All these years later, I'm still here and I'm still doing it, thankfully.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I'd like to go back to your English teacher in the fourth year. Obviously, you must have had some sort of smarts, talent, aptitude in writing for him or her to say to you, this is a thing that you should think about, being a writer. How did that come about? Were you aware of that at the time?
I was just sitting next to the smartest guy in the class and I could copy him, thankfully. No, it wasn't really it wasn't like a showdown discussion or anything. It was just a thing of every so often they would say, "Osley scored fairly well in the test." They clearly thought I had, as you say, an aptitude for writing. I think they knew my passion for football and for other sports. My wife Lindsay always says the biggest lie I ever told her was that I'm not a sports bore, and I think probably am at that stage. I was watching everything. Honestly, I said doing going to Rangers games as a fan, but as I mentioned, rallying, Formula One, golf, cricket, you name it, I was into it. So I think they probably knew that was one passion. They saw that I was good at something at school, and it just kind of evolved from there. So I had an inkling for it. Looked into a couple of university courses, decided to go for one at UWS, passed the interview, got the grades, and then next thing you know, that was me in a class of 30 people. At that time, journalism courses were actually really hard to get into. The other course I went for was at Glasgow Cali, and can't remember exactly how many people went for it. There was 30 spaces, and it was in the hundreds that actually applied for this course, and you had to go through the interview process. I actually got into that course as well and decided to go to UWS because it was in Hamilton and it was slightly closer to home, and it made the commute easy. But I dare say all these things, they work out well in the end. So out of that class of 30, there was 4 of us, I think, actually finished the 3-year course. And as far as I'm aware, there's 2 of us actually have a job in journalism, myself and a guy called Brian Copeland, who works for a paper in Scotland as well. And that shows you the drop off on the course and the drop off, and as we'll come on to discuss, some of the changes within the industry as well.
Yeah. That's an incredible amount. That's a very, very low percentage of people, and that doesn't reflect well on the course and or the academic institution either. If you've got that drop off, it's not as if, and with the greatest of respect to philosophers or art, artists and historians and such like that, there's certain things that people do with a level of interest that don't typically, especially in today's world, manifest themselves into an actual career in and of itself. I would think that journalism would be one such thing where you would have a natural path into the industry.
I think it probably highlights how difficult an industry it is to get into. So once you are in, you have a foothold in it almost to actually get yourself in the door. There's such a large churn, if you like, people and go in and work experience, or they go in on a placement, or they get a chance, and it's cutthroat. If you're good, you'll stay in and you'll rise and you'll get more chances. If you're not, you will get found out quite quickly, and you will then fall by the wayside. And there's always in someone else that's willing to come in. So I think it does show. I say that course that we're taking on 30 every year. So there have been 30 the year before me, there have been 30 the year after me. I don't know what the numbers are like in those ones, but that was at just one university. There's then other universities offering similar courses as well. So you could easily be looking at 100 people going into a course every year. Yeah. There's not going to be 100 jobs on newspaper desks come the end of it. It's very much a survival of the fittest, if you like to use an old cliche, but it does show that you have to be at a certain level. You have to have something for it. It's not something you can fall into and kind of bluff your way through.
Yeah, well, sure. And a couple of things that you had mentioned earlier in terms of, getting a bit of a head start, leaving school a little bit earlier than your class, your peer group, and getting that kind of portfolio, getting your feet wet, as it were, to getting in there. And then a key thing that you mentioned also was, getting a good contacts list. And is that something that's at the cornerstone of journalism in general, is getting a good contact list, maintaining that contact list, and doing right by the people who are within your network?
No, definitely. I think it was one of the things that I learned quite early on. So started, as you said earlier on, at the Heraldton Times. They were actually they were good enough to take men on work experience. So as part of the university course, you had to do a week's work experience. So I actually had a fortnight at Real Radio in Glasgow, a local radio station there, and had a fortnight in at the Heraldton Times. Decided then to go down the newspaper route rather than the broadcast route, and decided newspapers was, ironically, 16 years on or so, I'm now doing more broadcasting than the newspaper writing. Yeah. But newspapers that was my passion. That's what I wanted to do. I always had the ambition of seeing my name in print rather than hearing my voice on a radio bulletin. So they were kind enough to take me in on work experience, and went in, did my fortnight, then finished my uni course. My law exam was actually the day after Manchester, the European final. So somehow I managed to go through the highs and lows of getting to Manchester and managed to pass this exam. I actually had a ticket for Manchester that was taken away from me. The guy had agreed to sell it to me for 500 quid. And the day before, I got a message to say, I'm going to take my chances and go and sell it at the ground. You're not getting it. So my ticket to Manchester fell through. Thankfully, by that stage, I'd already done all the studying, and I was well prepped for the exam. Yeah. Went to Ibrox, watched the game on the big screen. Also had the disappointment that then followed. Woke up the next day, passed the exam, thankfully. And after that, Darrell King was the sports editor at the Heraldton Times. Yeah. And I emailed him and said, look, I was in a work experience 6 weeks ago. One, do you remember me? and two, can I come back in again? So thankfully, he remembered me. I must have made an okay impression. And he said, you can come back in again. So I went back in, did Monday to Friday. On the Friday, really enjoyed it. Can I come back in again on Monday? Aye, no bother, son. See you on Monday. Turned up again on the Monday. I basically did that for about a year, just every Friday. Can I come back in? And then it became a case of, can I go and do a press conference, or can I go and do a game, or can I do something else on the desk, just to try and expand my horizons and try and get as many bylines and as many contacts. And on the desk at that time, maybe 12 to 15 guys, all experienced, all really good at their jobs, and you pick up bits and bobs from all of them, and you pick up numbers from all of them. So say you were doing a Rangers feature and you wanted to speak to Charlie Miller or a 9-year-old player, somebody, of course, had a number for that 9-year-old player. As soon as you've got it, you never let it out of your sight, you never let it go, put it in the book, put it in your phone, and you keep it. And there were guys on the desk at that time who could phone anyone in Scottish sport and get them on their end of the phone, or drop them an email and get them chairman, chief execs, players, legends, you name it, they could get them. Other guys had a contacts book perhaps at a different level in terms of the names, but they knew that if they phoned them, they would definitely get them. So if you needed a Motherwell piece for the Evening Times, or you needed a Hamilton piece for the Evening Times, or a Partick Thistle piece, or you needed a Celtic or Rangers spread, they had the contacts that you could say, right, phone that, and you'll definitely get it.
Yeah.
Even if you were not the most gifted writer, you didn't have to be. Getting somebody on the other end of the phone is the hardest part of the job. Getting someone to tell you something is the hardest part. And it sounds daft because everybody thinks journalism, you must be really great writers, and your English must be spot on, and your punctuation must be spot on. There's guys who their writing is okay without being great. Not everyone is Hugh McElvanney.
Yeah.
But sometimes you don't have to be. If you can get someone on our end of the phone, that's worth its weight in gold.
Yeah. Yeah, to get that sort of type and style of information. For the folks that are listening that don't know about the Manchester reference, that was Rangers got to a European final in 2008, and the destination of the final was actually in Manchester. And it's, maybe the guy did you a favour in terms of your career, but maybe it didn't feel like that in the moment. The traveling and such is maybe just something that was meant to be or not. So one thing you mentioned there, you said a word, and I was going to actually ask you about this, and I think it really twigged from me when you were talking about the ability to, one, break in to an industry, two, prove your worth when you're there as a newbie, as a beginner, and then three, carve out a solid career as a result of that. And the word that you mentioned earlier there, Chris, was passion. And it's very evident from our conversation and the conversations that we've had previously that you're very, very passionate about what you do. What would your thoughts be around, possibly seeing other people maybe that have a different type and style, a different level of education, different skills and smarts in different areas, but they just kind of didn't seem to have that passion, that drive, that area of focus, and in some way that kind of dissipated. So the question is, like, how much do you think passion for a topic, a subject, an industry counts towards being successful in your chosen field?
I think for something like journalism, it's hugely important. It makes up such a big part of it.
Yeah.
It's not a 9 to 5 job. It's not you clock on at 9 in the morning, you do your hours, you do your shift, you turn your phone off, and that's you. If that's the type of lifestyle that you're looking for, if that's the type of job you're looking for, go and pick something else, because that's just not how it is. There've been a number of nights where you start first thing in the morning, you think you're finally finished at 7, 8 o'clock at night, phone goes, and then you can rip things up and start again. There's been managerial sackings, potential appointments. There's obviously transfer deadline days. There's a huge one. Been through one of them just recently. Again, these are like 15, 16-hour days. And if you don't enjoy it, if you don't have that passion for it, you're never going to get anything from it. You're not going to be able to do it.
Yeah.
You have, long days. You have difficult days trying to get information from people. Dealing with people can be difficult at times.
Yeah.
So if you didn't throw yourself into it, you wouldn't be able to do you wouldn't be able to do a job. You wouldn't succeed. You would fall out of the business fairly quickly. And always people ask me, you go to a party, you're out and about in a different company, what do you do? And you say, oh, I'm a journalist. And they're always really interested. They're always really interested to actually hear about the industry and hear your story and hear what you do. And then you tell them, like, oh, that's actually not as glamorous and as great as you think. It sounds actually a bit rubbish. Now, why do you bother when you've got those long days and you miss family things, or you miss nights out, or I say you've got all these stresses and the blood pressure through the roof. Now, why do you do it? And to be honest, I don't really know. No, it's something that you have to throw yourself into, and if you don't, I say you'll fall away from it fairly quickly. And I think you know quite early on whether it's going to be for you or not. And to go back to what we were saying earlier on about the churn, I think that's maybe reflective of people think it sounds great, and the idea you get to go and watch, the thing that people always say, you get to go and watch football for a living, that must be great. Well, yes, it is, but they also don't see the hours like you're sitting in press conference rooms waiting for people to turn up, or being messed about by people on the phone or in stadiums, finishing at 1 a.m. and then be back at your desk at 9 the next morning. So it sounds as if it's like a woe is me type story. I'm not trying to present it as that, but the actual reality of it, I think, is different than what people sometimes perceive, and that's perhaps why there is this churn, that unless you throw yourself into it and you're fully committed and you're fully passionate about it, you're just not going to get the best of the industry.
Definitely. It's the work that's done in the invisible that really makes, I mean, and everyone could say that about their job. If you're looking at a pilot, or you're looking at a teacher, or someone who speaks for a living, or whatever it is, the very small frame of what you see, or what you think you see even, is, well, that looks great, I think I might try that. And then you hear about the rest of the iceberg, if you use the iceberg analogy, and you're kind of like, yeah, no, I don't like being underwater. I don't like being cold that much. That looks like a lot of effort. I think I won't bother. But that seems to be exacerbated quite a bit in terms of the sometimes pain that goes with a journalism job. And it's interesting because I think people do what they do because of a variety of different reasons. Some people will just be all about money, or wealth, or health, or convenience, or whatever that looks like. But in terms of your passion, in terms of your drive, in terms of your interest, what would you say would be like the number one reason that you continue to do what you do?
I think it's being able to tell people things that they don't already know. So that's the basis of the job. It's being able to find out information that people don't know and then present it to them. So the job has evolved, if you like, over recent years. There's more opinion, there's more analysis involved in the game, but you still get more thrill out of a 350-word news story than you do out of a 1,500-word analysis piece. So, like I mentioned the transfer window earlier on, if you can get a transfer story ahead of your competitors, a lot of the competitors are friends. We work against each other, but we also work with each other at times. I speak to guys at other papers and other organisations more than I do my wife and my parents on most days. So there is that rivalry, but there is that friendly aspect to it as well. But if you can get something ahead of them, that's where you get your buzz from. So again, it could be a transfer story, it could be an update on the Ibrox situation that people might be aware of, something like that. When you have something that no one else has got and you can put it out there, and it goes in the paper and it's got exclusive Chris Jack on it, or it goes on the website and it's got exclusive Chris Jack on it, that's where you get your hits from. That's where you get your buzz from, I think.
Yeah. Excellent. So, what are some of the most memorable moments or stories that you've covered? We talked earlier about 55 and the journey to Seville in 2022. Are those the most memorable that you've covered, or do you have other ones?
They're definitely up there, and just in terms of significance, obviously, for what it meant to the club, what it meant on a professional level to actually say you have covered a European final, as when you if you were to sit me down at 17 years old and say, do you think you'll ever cover Rangers in a European final? I would have said, well, I don't think I'll ever see Rangers in a European final. Turns out there was actually two of them, both of them unsuccessful, unfortunately. But I never thought at that time that I would get to that level, being able to actually cover these events. And sitting in that stadium in Seville, it is just one of these things you look around and you just have to take it in.
Yeah.
Being one of the fortunate people, also during COVID, when Rangers won 55, being one of the fortunate dozen or so to actually get into the stadiums and watch that campaign unfold, given everything that Rangers had, as you well know, had been through over 10 years before. So that's those two, I think, are probably the big moments. Managed to cover Scotland at a European Championships as well. Again, something not a lot of people have done. Yeah. And then it comes down to, as I mentioned earlier, those exclusive stories, those telling people things before anybody else. I think probably the best one most recently was Giovanni Van Bronckhorst being sacked as Rangers manager. I was the first one to have that. Now, I knew at that stage that other people were on the case, and I think I maybe had it online 5 minutes before anyone else, but 5 minutes is 5 minutes, and I'm taking it, and I'm 2 years on, I'm still dining out on it. things like that. We've had, I think, covering a lot of the bad years at Rangers in terms of some of the boardroom disagreements is probably putting it lightly. A lot of the financial stuff, the downfall of Rangers, and then the rise of Rangers, getting involved in things financially that you never thought you'd have to be involved in, really learning on the job as stock exchange announcements are coming out and all these buzzwords that you never heard of before, and thankfully we don't have to deal with now, nomads and all the rest of it. So you find yourself in these situations thinking, I never thought I would be here, but you just have to roll with the punches. You just have to go with it. So I think that certainly doing the Rangers beat over the last 9-10 years or so now, that's given me some great experiences, being on some great European trips, hearing some of those stories from the guys that have been doing this job for 20, 30, 40 years, hearing how the industry was. You can be sitting in a bizarre outpost in Eastern Europe somewhere with a pizza and a beer and just chewing the fat with guys, and hearing all these stories. And it's these type of things that you never thought you would do. When you're doing them, you perhaps take it for granted. If it was to end tomorrow, would I miss it? Definitely. But I could also look back and say, well, I've had some run at it, and I've done and achieved more than I ever thought I would.
Yeah. And it's really embracing and leaning into the circumstances that are afforded to you. And that probably isn't for everyone, even within the journalism industry. Some people might just be like, oof, this is too far outside of my comfort zone right now. I'm just not equipped to be able to cover this kind of thing. And then folks like yourself that are saying, why not? I don't know anything about it right now. As you mentioned earlier, I'll learn on the job and I'll move forward and try and see, just basically do the best job I can.
Sometimes there's no other way for it. I think those years doing the Rangers stuff was probably a prime example of that. You had to become an expert in a field that you were not an expert in, and that wasn't just for me still being relatively new to the industry and relatively new to the job. Guys who had been doing it for decades got thrown into a situation that they had never experienced before. So some of the financial statements and the ramifications of the Rangers situation were just so out with our comfort zone. Yeah. Our normal week consisted of going to a game on a Saturday, pre-match press conference on the Friday, game Saturday or Sunday, and you're speaking about goals or hamstring injuries or league tables, and all of a sudden it's then these financial matters that are just so far out with your knowledge base. We didn't go to uni to do accounts and to study the stock exchange, but that was the situation that we found ourselves in, and it gave me some great contacts, gave me some great insight, learned a few things, some of which I can still remember. But if you, again, I think it feeds into that passion. If you didn't have it during that time, you'd put your hands up and say, actually, this is not for me either. You had to do it, and you did it well. If you don't fancy it, well, somebody else will. So again, I think I learned a lot during that time. It certainly gave me a good grounding for what has followed in the years to follow.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned, sitting in some outpost in Eastern Europe, just basically catching up with some veterans and such. And it makes me think about some of the characters in the time that you've been doing this, creeping up for, almost 20 years now. You must have met some fascinating individuals over the years in the various sports and stories that you've covered. Who springs to mind as being one of those fascinating individuals?
Oh, again, they're probably all very Rangers related. I think Dave King is a very fascinating individual. Spoke to him a number of occasions. He was kind enough to write the foreword into the book that marked Title 55. Walter Smith, obviously, as just a huge figure in Rangers history, just had such a presence about him, had such a legendary status. Someone that he was the manager as when I'm growing up and watching Rangers first,
Yeah.
and then going to the games. He was the Rangers manager. He was Mr. Rangers in many regards. Ali McCoist obviously falls into that category as well. Graham Souness I always found had that aura, had that presence about him. Actually, the first time I met him was at a press conference at Hampden. It was a PR event for William Hill, for example, was sponsoring the Scottish Cup, I think it was, and Graham was there to promote it. And it was one of those, he walks into the room and you just know that he's in the room. I think Stephen Gerrard had that similar presence and aura about him as well. So guys like that who you have admired for so long, who you obviously as legendary figures of the game. I'm not saying you become their best pals and they're not taking you out for dinner, but just to be in their presence and to have the chance to speak to them and get to know them slightly has always been a great privilege. And that's one of the things I like. Now I mentioned sitting having a beer somewhere. There's guys obviously here who were closer to them. Relationships between journalists and club figures, managers, players, executives, it has changed. I think there's now more of an us and them between clubs and the media. In years gone by, there was very much a more collaborative approach. Guys could phone Walter or could phone Graham Souness or could phone Sir Alex Ferguson and they would get whatever they had to get out of them. So that relationship has changed. Of course, I'm going to say it's changed for the worse because I've not had that benefit, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Again, you hear stories of guys being able to like phone in and check out stories, get lines from these guys, but then know where that boundary is and say, look, we're now just in social time. Can we go for a bit of lunch? Can we go for a drink? And those relationships were just so different then than they were now. So it's one thing I almost feel sorry for the people who will be the journalists of tomorrow, the journalists that are going through their courses or that want to go through courses and get into the media. I never saw the industry at its best. I've certainly not lived through it at its worst, but I do wonder what will it be like in 10, 15, 20 years when there's more PR people, when there's more communication staff, when those bonds, if you like, are even further apart. The glory days, if you like, are certainly gone in terms of the industry, in terms of those relationships, and that's one of the things I find myself in a kind of bridging position almost of. I've not seen it at its best, but I can still hear about it when it was a very, very different industry to work in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one thing I say to students in the classroom quite a lot, regardless of what's happened, where you're at, where you're positioned in your industry and your career at that particular time. Today is the good old days. And I get a few quizzical looks from that, and I say, in 2, 3, 4, 5, pick a number, years' time, you're going to look back and say, you know what, see 2024, we had this, we were able to do that, we had carte blanche access to, and insert whatever luxury that you're enjoying right now that you don't quite know that you're enjoying right now, So it's good to have that perspective, good to understand that change is going to happen. And it's a fantastic segue into what I was going to ask you next in terms of the biggest changes, obviously social media, or actually the internet, social media, the ability to access information, it feels like almost real time now, places a potential redundancy on the way that things were done before, certainly in certain markets and such. What are some of the biggest changes that you've seen in sports journalism since you started?
I think social media has probably been the biggest one, and not just in terms of like Facebook, that type of thing. I think Twitter has been a big thing in that regard. Breaking news is almost a dying art as such, because an exclusive is only an exclusive for 10 seconds. If you mentioned that earlier on about having your name on something, this exclusive, it's just hard. One, they're harder and harder to get because there's that many competing factors. But two, they're harder and harder to hold on to. If you, in days gone by, if you had a transfer line or an injury line and you got it at 11 o'clock in the morning, you'd hold on to it for tomorrow morning's paper. You would know that nobody else would get it, nobody else would get a sniff. And when it went out in the Herald, it went out in the Evening Times the following morning, that was your story. And other people were then chasing it. Now that's not the case. Now, if you get a story, it has to go online just now, because it's always in the back of your mind. Well, what if someone else gets it? We're then not both getting it in the paper at the same time. He's going to get it first online, like the Gio Evan Bronckhorst story earlier on. Yeah. I think that came through. I got a phone call about 8:30 or so in the morning to say the manager had been sacked. That's never going to hold until next day's paper. It was never going to hold until lunchtime. So while I'm lying in bed, getting the phone call, checking it out, at the same time, I'm then writing it, knowing, because as soon as I then get a second phone call to confirm it, it has to go live. I don't have time to get to and then go and make myself a coffee and a bit of toast and sit and get a laptop out and say, right, let's start working here. So that social media aspect of it has certainly changed. Also means you're probably never fully off duty. You can be lying in bed at 11 o'clock at night and you see something on Twitter and you then have to react to it or you have to make calls on it. Yeah. So that's probably turned it from an all-encompassing job into an almost 24-hour job. Now, you're only really off when you're sleeping, and if you are, then you make sure your phone's on silent so nobody can get to you. But I think social media has definitely been the biggest, been a big factor in that, and also the change from more newspaper-based strategies to online-based strategies. Obviously, now working for the Rangers Review, and it's a solely online platform. So our income comes from YouTube hits on the videos that we do. It comes through subscriptions. It comes through regular web hits and advertising revenue, and that's a big change for the industry. Now, for guys who have grown up only writing for a newspaper, it's a big mindset change for them to get into, having to go to a press conference and record video clips and then go to a game and then do a post-match video on it. Things that 5 years ago, not talking like 30 years ago, 5 years ago, it just wasn't happening. Newspaper guys had their own press conference, had their own sit down, they did their own thing, very different. So they didn't care what Sky or the BBC or any of the broadcasters were doing. They were the daily newspapers. They were the dominant force in Scottish media, and that has changed. Again, you can almost lament that, if you like, as you say, the good old days, but you have to move with the times. I think that's something I've proven myself to be quite good at, because again, you either moved with the times and you evolved and adapted, or you would fall out of the industry. If you really put your head in the sand and say, I'm a daily newspaper man, this is all I want to do, I only want to write for the paper, I'm not getting involved in podcasts, I'm not doing YouTube shows, I'm not doing video clips after a game, ultimately they'll replace you, because someone else will want to do that job. There's a stream of people that would love to be in my position, and I think you always have to be kind of aware of that and be cognizant of that. If I don't do it, somebody else will do it. I'm not. You can't be blasé and be cocky about it, if you like, and say, well, I'm really good at my job and I've done it for so long, I'm irreplaceable. Everybody's replaceable. Everybody will have a replacement if you decide that it's not for you. So I think it has evolved quite quickly, I think. Again, I can remember when I first went into the industry, and people would say, why are you going into newspapers? There were no newspapers in 10 years. That was nearly 20 years or so now. 5 years ago, people were saying there were no newspapers in 10 years. I think there will always be some form of print product, and I hope there is, because I still enjoy reading newspapers, still cherish newspapers for what they are and for what they've given me. But I know that their future, my future, is in online, is in more digital, outlooks. And as I said earlier on, quite ironic that back when I was picking my uni course, decided I didn't want to be a broadcaster, didn't want to hear my voice on radio, didn't want to do TV, and now I'm doing TV and radio stuff all the time, doing YouTube videos before and after every game and every press conference. But it's funny how things evolve and how things change.
And being adaptable to that change, you were true to yourself when you made that choice in the beginning, and you have been open enough to evolve and say, this is what people want. I have a level of experience and comfort now doing what I'm doing, and and the ability to essentially satisfy your customer base is something. You've touched on a whole bunch of things there. One thing I did mention in your bio at the beginning, and you just hit upon there, was the Rangers Review. For those who don't know, what is the Rangers Review?
The Rangers Review was launched a couple of seasons ago now, so it was launched alongside a Celtic website called the Celtic Way. So it was Newsquest, which is the company that own and run the Herald and Evening Times. They decided to go through a change in their outlook, so they still invest in the print product, but they were trying to explore what the market was like for online journalism. So what profits can be made, what business model can we build. So both the Rangers Review and the Celtic Way were launched at the same time as like niche websites. So the idea is you would perhaps not subscribe to the Herald because you're only focused on Rangers. So you are our sole target audience, or Celtic. We've now recently launched a rugby website. We've launched Hibs and Hearts websites as well. So it's really trying to dig into those niche markets. So rather than providing the biggest coverage possible and say, well, if you take out a subscription for this website, you can have 7 different clubs being focused on. You can have rugby. You can have every sport going. We are saying we only write about Rangers. If you want to read about Rangers, this is the place to come to. So I launched a few seasons ago. I was then asked. Actually, today is the anniversary of me moving over. I was asked this time last year to move over and to join the Rangers Review team, and it wasn't an easy decision, and it was in some regards, because I knew what I was leaving behind. I was leaving behind the daily newspaper press pack, so guys from different papers that I had grown up with, I'd been on these trips with, I'd become really close to. I still see them at games, still see them at press conferences, but don't work as closely with them. Yeah. But I knew that this was ultimately going to be the future. In 15 years' time, the Herald might not need a Rangers correspondent, but the Rangers Review will need a Rangers correspondent, because the clues always in the name. So it's myself, Joshua Barry, and Derek Clark are the 3 guys that do it. All of us have got slightly different specialities. I would say Derek is a broadcast expert. He's very good. He hosts our morning briefing show, which is on YouTube every morning, and so he hosts that and does a lot of our social media. He does the Facebook, he does a Twitter account, he does our TikTok, and he's very broadcast friendly. Josh, he's really into his stats and his analysis, so he watches and looks at a game in a very different way than I would. I would write a match report with a wee bit of tactical insight, but a more here's what happened and why. Josh can tell you here's what happened, why, and how, because he knows how the side is going to set up. He's a bit more in tune with the tactical side of it. Loves his pie charts and his graphs and his graphics and all the case statsy type stuff. I've slowly but surely found out what some of them mean. I'm getting slightly more accustomed to some of the numbers and some of the new phrases, but I'm probably definitely more old school than him. So he's actually my line manager, my boss in effect, despite the fact he's about 12 years younger than me, I think. So I'm very much the old dog that he's trying to teach new tricks. But it's a nice balance between us, because he's just come into the industry in the last couple of years. So like I was saying earlier on about me hearing the stories from the older guys, I'm now telling him my stories of things that I've done or experiences that I had or situations that I found myself in. So I like to think I'm passing on some of that experience, some of that newspaper background to him, and he's certainly helping me in terms of evolving into a more well-rounded digital mind. So I say I'm doing more broadcast stuff, doing more website stuff than I've ever done. But in terms of future-proofing me, if you like, for the industry, I think the move has certainly been great. The website and the YouTube channel continues to go from strength to strength. We get several thousand subscribers on the site, tens of thousands of subscribers on the YouTube channel, and people always ask them, what kind of numbers do you get and what kind of money's in it, and the kind of feedback that we get and the engagement that we get always surprises. So thousands of people join us on the morning briefing every morning just to listen to three guys talk about Rangers and to go through transfer tittle-tattle or injury updates or to talk about the game. But there's such engagement in it and such a key feedback, such a key community spirit in it almost as well. So it's certainly been a good move for me. So I really enjoyed the transition, even if I say I'm probably the dinosaur off the desk.
Yeah, I love it. And would it be fair to say for Rangers fans, by Rangers fans?
Definitely so. We like to class ourselves as the best Rangers journalism. That's our tagline, because we think we provide a service that's different to what others are offering in terms of our website coverage. You have match reports, you've got the press conference stuff, you have the general news that other people will have, but we think we do it in our own way, but a bit more in depth. So we've got the video coverage as well. And it goes back to what we discussed right at the start about that passion. You couldn't do it if you didn't have a passion for the club and for the team and for the people, because you just wouldn't be able to throw yourself into it. There's always this great debate in Scottish football about you can't tell people who you support, and I've never really bought into that, because if you grew up and you had that passion in the game, you had to have a team. You're not just going to grow up as a kid in Scotland being a general football fan. You're going to have a team. You're going to have someone who you're more aligned to. You're going to have a favourite player. You're going to have a first strip. Your parents or grandparents or aunts and uncles, your friends group are going to have a team. So you're naturally going to then follow someone. And for you then to go through that process and to have a team to then get involved in sports journalism, you have to have been through that process. You have to be invested in the game. You have to love Scottish football to be able to do this job. And if you love Scottish football, you've got a team. So I've never really bought into that thing of, oh, you're meant to be a journalist and you can't say who you support. So we are still hugely professional. We still call it as we see it. No, we're not happy clapping on behalf of the football club. We're not an extension of the football club PR wing. Falling out with enough people over my time, had enough disagreements with people over my time for that to be the case. But we clearly, if Rangers win at the weekend or they lose, we also have an opinion on that. If they win, it puts us in a better mood. If they lose, we're naturally not in as good a mood.
Yeah.
But I think that's the thing that separates us from other fans and other like media groups, if you like. We still have that professionalism. We still have those professional standards that I've grown up with, that I've developed, that I've had passed down to me from the guys that used to work alongside. They all had teams, but they all knew where that line was. And I think that's a really important aspect of it. So yes, it is Rangers journalism by Rangers fans, but it's important that it is journalism. It's important that it is analytical. It's important that it is critical. It's important that we are still holding people to account, and I think that's something that's a balance that we always try to strike.
Yeah. That sounds incredible. Before I let you go, one last question to be able to pass on to other potential generations of journalism academics. What advice would you give to any aspiring sports journalists that are looking to make their start or make their mark in the industry?
Don't do it. The hours are too long and the money's rubbish.
A
No,
shining
I would,
advert.
I would, I would never put anyone off it. If they decide this is what they want to do, I would hope that either by listening to us over the last hour or so, or any I've had like work experience guys in the office, or anyone who's ever emailed me or out and about and asked me, I would hope that I always give a fair and honest reflection of what the industry is like, how hard it is to get into it, how hard it is to stay into it, but how rewarding it is. And that's not just in terms of getting paid to do something you love. So there's friendships that I've made that over the few years that I've done it that will last me hopefully for the rest of my days. Some of the trips that I've been on, some of the places that I've been on, some of the things I've been able to do and achieve and see people that I've met. Never believed any of that would have been possible when I'm sitting filling a university form saying I'm going to go and be a journalist. It could have been working for a local newspaper, doing village fetes and going doing court cases and cat stuck up trees. That could have been all I achieved in journalism. I've achieved way more than that. I've done way more than I ever thought I would do. So I hope that my story and the story of other guys in the business inspires people rather than puts them off. So yes, it's difficult. Yes, there's challenges, but if you want to do it, hopefully I show that now you can do it, and you can go and meet these people. You can go on these trips. You can have these experiences. You can get those stories.
Fabulous. Absolutely brilliant. Chris, where can people find you?
They can find all of my words on rangersreview.co.uk. They can find all of our video content on the Rangers Review YouTube channel. Just go on there and put in a search. And I'm also on Twitter as well, so it's at Chris_Jack89. If anyone has any feedback, comments, questions, looking for advice, I said by all means just reach out. Always happy to help.
Fabulous. You're a good man, Chris. Thank you very much for taking the time to chat with me today, my friend.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me on. Good to see you.